I needed to be absolutely certain I wasn't under surveillance when I arrived at the meeting, so I didn't take a direct route to my final destination in Western Europe. I first traveled by plane to another country where I conducted a circuitous surveillance route on foot through the city and made my way to the train station. From there, I took a train to my final destination. I was traveling as a tourist, so I built in a few days in the city to explore museums to sell my cover. If I was under the watchful eye of the country's local security services, I needed to make them believe I was actually a tourist, not an undercover CIA operative. From there, I headed north of the city to the small village where we agreed to meet. I sat in the back of a dimly lit pub with a clear view of the door, anxiously awaiting my asset's arrival and the secrets he'd bring with him. It was the last clandestine operation I would conduct during my career at the CIA. I was nearly a decade in, and I knew at the end of this tour I would resign. But before I did, I'd have this one last meeting with an asset I had grown to respect and even develop a genuine friendship with over the years. He also happened to be best positioned to report on a contentious foreign presidential election of interest to policymakers back home, making him an important case for the CIA station where I was posted. What's more, he was smart and funny to boot, both qualities that can't be underestimated when you're spending hours debriefing an asset for intelligence. When I looked up from my menu to see him walking through the front door of the pub, I was struck with relief. There's always a chance that an asset won't show up for a third country meeting. And although he hadn't covertly signaled to me that he wouldn't be there, I knew all too well that when it comes to espionage, things can always change. We greeted each other like any old friends meeting in a pub would, and exchanged pleasantries over pints of beer while I gave him specific instructions on when and where to meet me next. I booked a room at a nearby hotel with plenty of built-in lookbacks along the way to ensure he didn't inadvertently bring surveillance with him to the meeting. Any association with the CIA could put him and his family at serious risk, not to mention the possibility of my getting arrested. My tourist persona didn't afford me protection. I carefully slid a key to the hotel room across the table before leaving the pub and beginning my next surveillance detection route on foot toward the hotel, the place where, in just a few hours, my asset would divulge everything he knew about his country's elections.
Thank you. This is such a unique and compelling book, and you really do such a good job of weaving gripping spy narrative with criticism, with information, historical and otherwise, and that is not easy to do. So I laud that so much. For those who aren't familiar with the book's thesis, its content already, could you give a little elevator pitch and then talk a little bit about your background and how that led you to write it?
Yes. So I love sharing this little anecdote because I think that it really illustrates why a book like this is necessary now. And it's that recently my husband and I were giving advice to a very bright young woman who was interested in going into intelligence. And there's okay. And
it's a stalker fan.
Yes, yeah. Please, no pictures. And she says to me, she would be a natural case officer, a very bright young woman, just graduated high school, got into all of her top tier colleges that she applied to. And she says, Christina, I just really don't think I can have sex with strangers. And I said, well, but why would you do that? Mm-hmm. And she said, well, I know that's what the CIA is going to ask me to do. And meanwhile, I'm thinking, how long has this poor girl been thinking that that's what I did for a living?
Oh my God.
So I felt like I really had to clear that up with her first, right? But I share that because it's just such a great example of why a book about the female spy is so important, even in the year 2025, because we have been surrounded by so many misconceptions about women in espionage. I mean, look at the Bond girl over the years. She was always mere arm candy to Bond, the more impressive Bond, who's actually a terrible spy, although I am a fan of the movie.
You can hold these multitudes.
Yes, exactly. Make space. But, even her names were punchlines, right? Holly Goodhead, Pussy Galore, Honey Rider. But the truth is, real women in espionage were so, like, not even close to a punchline, right? They were competent, extraordinarily talented, but their stories really aren't known. I mean, you can't throw a rock without finding the memoir of a man's war stories from like the Cold War and espionage. But women, for whatever reason we can debate all day long, are less likely to share those stories. And so I wanted to both dispel the myths about women in espionage while also, for the sake of historical record, and amplify these women's voices during a time that I think it's particularly important in our country, in a way that is easily digestible, and you're learning about something really serious, but it goes down smoothly. I like to call it chocolate on broccoli. And so you kind of can take it to the pool, read it on the plane, but you're walking away learning so much, but in a really approachable way.
Yeah, yeah. And I don't know. I mean, I obviously know about the women that you wrote about, but I don't know who else could have written this book, because your voice is so accessible and you did such a rigorous job investigating these stories. And as you know, someone who comes from this world yourself, it just feels so intimate and urgent. And I was wondering if you could maybe talk to the attendees here tonight about how you structured the book, because I can't imagine how daunting it would be to take this volume of information and figure out how to curate it in a way that would be digestible. So could you talk a little bit about how the book is formatted, and just like your craft process in general?
Yes. So I was really lucky in the aspect of like being a former CIA officer, that I had access to these incredible women who had never shared their stories before. And so that meant that I had all this great data to weed through, rather than just a handful of historical records, right? I immediately had bona fides with these women who wouldn't feel comfortable speaking to another author or a reporter, right? And so that was great off the bat. But then in terms of like structuring and organizing all of the research, which was a lot, because I'd interviewed dozens of women across the agency, and then had to determine, which interviews, which women's experiences were going to be more for context, to kind of paint the picture of the era, and which women would be the ones that I would really delve deep and tell their stories. But I decided to organize it by decade, and I really wanted to paint the picture each decade, starting with 1960. What was going on politically, socially, culturally for women at the time, to give us like these cultural touchstones that we can hold on to, and then looking at our public perception of the Bond girl in that era, and then zeroing in, this is what was really going on for women in espionage at the time, and then highlighting particularly women whose experiences are emblematic of that given era. And so there are some women, there's a first wave from like the 60s through the early 90s, and we get to follow their stories. And then there's a bit of a changeover where we get another wave of women. And then of course we have newer women who are currently there towards the end. And so we get to know all of them. And I love all of these women so much, and they all have different pathways that they've taken. And that was really important to me to illustrate, because I wanted to humanize these women. I mean, these are women who are doing extraordinarily important work and, so much risk, but they're also making choices about their relationships, their families, elder care, choices that will resonate with women no matter what career field they're in.
Yeah. Yeah. So I write about cults a lot in my work, and there's like an inherent appeal there, which I'm grateful for. Like, you don't have to do a lot of pitching to get someone to be interested in a story about a cult. And I feel like similarly, you don't have to do like a ton of work to get someone interested in a story about a spy. And so like, there's all this just innate narrative excitement and tension in this book that's made only more exciting because it's real. Were there any particularly juicy, I mean, there are so many juicy stories in this, ones that are like shocking and graphic and whatever, but were there any particularly surprising stories in this book that inspired you to reorient yourself around your own experience, and how so?
Yes, I think particularly I was surprised at the way that I connected with women from completely different decades. And you would think that our experiences would be so different. Someone who started in the 60s and someone who started in the early aughts. And I guess perhaps that's disheartening that we experience some of the same sexual harassment. But that really helped me process some of what I experienced at the agency as well, and being able to like share that knowing look of why we've handled things the way that we did, and knowing that I wasn't the only one. And that really helped me process some of my experiences there. And we've talked at length about how the CIA is culty on your podcast. And so it meets both worlds there. So yeah, it really helped me process a lot of that, knowing that we had similar experiences. And I think that's been one of the biggest rewards, has been getting to know these women and having that connection. And one of the topics that comes up throughout the book is this idea of whether or not there was a sisterhood at the CIA. And the more women I spoke to, the more I felt like a lot of that feeling of sisterhood comes after we leave, because there are a lot of type A people hired with very sharp elbows. You're focused on getting ahead. There's a scarcity complex. I won't say for the whole agency. There are plenty of women who had positive experiences in different directorates, but particularly in the Directorate of Operations, where you're doing the clandestine work, that hasn't been the case for quite some time. So, and I think there were women that felt like they made it to the top and then forgot to send the elevator back down for the other women, so to speak. And so that was something that was really not surprising, but somewhat things that you would think would be things that women all got behind. Like, for example, there was a gender discrimination class action suit in the early 90s. I was expecting that all women would have seen that as a positive development, but some women I interviewed didn't see it that way at all and didn't want to be associated with it. So it was a really interesting topic to dive into because it was just so much more nuanced than I expected. And I think from the outside looking in, we love this idea of like a sisterhood from like the 40s and 50s, and there were all these women, but like that's just not reality, unfortunately. But I do think it's moving in a more positive direction.
Yeah. Yeah. The gender distribution of power within the CIA really mirrors a cult in many ways, as you've pointed out to me, and as we discussed. Christina I met because she pitched.
I slid into her DM.
Yes. I have a podcast called Sounds Like a Cult, and Christina was a guest on an episode about the cult of the CIA, and breaking down those parallels was really fascinating. But speaking of the juxtaposition of progress and secrecy, that is a theme in this book, and obviously like a tension that is present within the CIA. What do you think progress looks like in an organization that is built to hide things?
I think that is such a good point, because it adds this complex layer over everything, right? Because one of the most recent problems the agency is dealing with is sexual harassment. Well, it's been a problem for a long time, but they recently started dealing with the fact that they had been mishandling reports of sexual harassment and sexual assault for decades. And so the problem is when you add this level of secrecy to it, and women are discouraged from reporting because they're told, oh, well, you're going to jeopardize your cover, you're going to jeopardize the cover of your colleague, and they're discouraged from going to law enforcement. And that is a real problem. And I think that that is one of the reasons why the Me Too movement was so delayed arriving there. I always say it's like trying to turn the Titanic, because it's just so slow to change there. And the secrecy just makes it so much more complicated, because there is this kind of level of fear and anxiety. So many of us who have left, we like swap stories about like, what is your recurring nightmare? And some people have nightmares that they've like accidentally taken home classified information. I have a recurring nightmare that like I accidentally smoke pot and like lose my clearance. And like, yeah, but I can do that now, like if I want.
I'm so happy for you.
Yes, right. And so we're all kind of like, there is this fear kind of sewn into you to not report. And so I do think that holds back progress. Prior to January of this year, I would have said, oh my gosh, like I'm so cautiously optimistic. This younger generation, they don't have this view of like career suicide. They have this different energy. They're willing to speak up. But that, of course, all changed with the rollback of DEI initiatives. And so I'm told the morale and the atmosphere at headquarters now is very different, and there's a lot of fear. And so I do think that the progress is going to be at a standstill for a while, hopefully not reverted too much, but we're kind of just trying to weather the storm at this point.
Can you talk about the significance of this book landing in the cultural landscape of today, considering everything that you just mentioned? because, you know, you wrote it when morale in terms of inclusivity was a little higher. So like, how do you situate this book in the zeitgeist now?
Yeah, it's so wild because I actually went back to headquarters in the summer of 2023 to interview current women. And I met with like the Office of Diversity, and we had these fantastic conversations. And I was feeling like, wow, like if this is the next generation of CIA officers, like we're in good hands. And so then for things to change like this, I considered, like, we hadn't gone to print yet. And I had considered changing the author's note or the epilogue, but I really came to the decision that this book was meant to be a celebration, and I didn't want to kind of stick it in time for something really negative, and I wanted it to still amplify the voices in the way that I intended, while at the same time adding a caveat when I can, which is the biggest message of this book is that women are vital to national security, and we bring a different perspective. We are highly capable. Oftentimes the women I interviewed, their experiences, they were much better than many of their male colleagues at collecting foreign intelligence. And so if there's anything people walk away with, it's that, right? But the issue now is that much of the progress stems from these grassroots groups and these women's mentoring groups that took decades to, coalesce. And now, as of January, they don't exist, right? Yeah. And so it's never about the thing, like diversity is this like dirty word, but when it comes to espionage, we're meeting with people all over the globe, right? And I always say, like, it doesn't serve anyone to go back to an organization that's male, pale, and Yale. Okay, like we need to have diversity of thought, diversity of language, diversity of experience, and that includes women. It includes women and people in general of color, right? Which is something the agency is severely lacking in. So yeah, it landing now is something I really didn't anticipate. Right. But I think it's all the more important to amplify women's voices and to really drive the message home that like women are needed in national security. And it's my hope that, women won't read this and then shy away from it. It's that they will learn about the women who came before them, who blazed the trail, the women who I was, naive about when I worked there because I was so focused on my own career and getting ahead, right? But that young women will go in knowing about those women, knowing about the progress they made, ready to build on it, eyes wide open, because they realize that they play an important role.
It's such a weird challenge to have to like mediate the cultural context in which your book might be published, because it's so hard to predict. And I don't know, I remember a point in editing a late draft of my second book, Cultish, where I changed all of the present tense verbs in relation to Donald Trump as past tense. And now that isn't grammatically correct anymore. And it's so hard. And I guess when you write cultural criticism or feminist criticism or anything that could be put into that category, you experience this weird cognitive dissonance because you want your work to be irrelevant, right? Because you would like to live in a culture where it's not needed. And then lo and behold, anyways, yes. So the one thing I want to ask before we get into a little game, because I prepared a game, there is this powerful shift in language throughout the book from girls in the typing pool to case officers. Did any particular word or phrase change how you saw these women in the book?
Oh my gosh. Okay. A word about the women?
Yeah, like a phrase or like some kind of descriptor that sort of snapped into focus the experience of someone in the book.
Yeah, I mean, there were so many things in particular that Denise said that really resonated with me. When she talks about her life choices, I don't want to give too much away, but I found it really compelling because she made these choices about the mission, and she had said, she's just such a funny character, and she said the phrase, "Walk a mile in my flip-flops," and but then she said to me, listen, I didn't expect to be sitting here, in my 50s, unmarried, without kids, but I woke up one day and the train left the station. And this is more than one word, so I'm
I accept.
but I just thought that was so powerful because she said, I just woke up one day and that was it. And I just thought it was so emblematic of all of our lives and our choices that we make. And sometimes we just end up on a path and not that we, not one that we expect. And we either shift and pivot. And I do think for women in particular, we are always reinventing ourselves. And so she was just such a great example of that. And just so impressive. And for those of you who haven't read it, she joined the agency as a secretary at 19 and worked her way all the way up to deputy chief of station and was poised to become a chief of station, and then made, some different choices for her personal life for the first time ever. So I think it was, my conversations with her really helped me view things differently.
Yeah.
Walk a mile in my flip-flops.
So good. What a pleasure to interview such a character. Okay, so I want to play a little game and then we'll open up to some audience questions. So pop culture portrayals of women in the CIA are a central motif in your book. It's how you opened our conversation today, reference to the Bond franchise. And so I've created a game called the Spy Media Accuracy Debriefing.
Ooh.
Where I'm going to read you a list of movies and TV shows that portrayed women in the CIA, all of which I am very familiar with. For some reason, there was like a robust canon of like CIA TV shows and movies from like the early 2010s when I was like in college. So I feel like that was my exposure to the CIA. And you're going to say whether you think each one was accurate, mid-accurate, or not accurate at all.
Ooh,
and the categories are classified and verified. That's the most accurate.
Ooh, I love a good category.
Plausibly deniable is like, not quite right, but not totally wrong either.
Okay.
And then there's full-born fantasy, which is wildly unrealistic or just plain wrong, but still entertaining. Okay. So classified and verified, plausibly deniable, full-born fantasy. Okay, it's like a memory challenge.
Like someone can write that down for me.
I literally have it written down in case you need a cheat sheet. Okay, the first piece of media that I'm going to reference is the series Homeland. Anyone familiar?
What was like the lowest one? Full-blown fantasy. I'm going with that. Ding, ding, ding.
What about that franchise do you think was the most glaringly?
I didn't make it very far, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah.
But I think the instability of, is it Carrie Mathison?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, there's just no way that she would even still be there, right? Sure. Because, you have to hide your mental illness if you want to work there. Famously. We all know that.
Totally. Okay. Next one. Classified and verified, plausibly deniable, or full-born fantasy. The movie Argo, 2012. Argo.
Classified and verified.
Boom.
Yes, love it.
Based on a true story.
When I left the agency, I asked my husband to get a cake for me that said Argo, fuck yourself.
Amazing.
And it was great.
So you feel represented by this film?
Yes, I love it.
Incredible. Okay. Next piece of media is the television series The Americans, which premiered in 2013.
I'll say plausible deniable, right?
Plausibly deniable.
Yeah, plausibly deniable. And I didn't make it through the whole series, but I enjoyed what I did watch.
Yeah. Was there anything that you saw where you're like, okay, I'm on board.
Well, I think just like a snapshot in time, right? Because it's like a period show, right?
Yeah.
Isn't it?
Yeah, it's like Cold War era.
Yeah. So I feel like, it's pretty on the nose, Russian sleeper. So I was like, I think, yeah.
Cool. Okay, great. And then we're going to do one more. This one is the film 2012 Zero Dark 30.
Oh, that's a toughie. People have strong feelings on that. I'll go with the plausibly deniable. I think there's some bits of truth in it, but I know there are some that people will say were, not accurate.
Okay, fair. It's not Bryce Dallas Howard. It's her identical twin. Oh,
yes.
What's her name? The actress. It's also Christina. Isn't that her
name? Is it?
Jessica Chastain.
Oh, yes. Yes.
Jessica
She's also
Chastain.
In that other female spy movie.
For sure.
That was
fairly
recent.
Angelina
and that one is a full-born fantasy.
Okay,
what is
great.
it? The Ring, the Cooper. What is it? Anybody?
When
I saw a couple years ago, it was like a female spy from every country.
Ooh, oh shoot, I should have put that on the list, but I was really fixated on this, on these movies and TV shows for my coming of age era.
What
And
about Alias? That was probably before your time.
Oh, Alias. No, I love Alias.
Okay. Yes, I love it too. It's probably full-on fantasy, but I love it.
Right.
And so many of us joined because of Jennifer Garner.
Oh my God.
Like, forgot about Argo.
That's good to know. Wow. Okay. Amazing. Thank you for playing my game. Thank you for answering my questions. I'd love to open it up to our guests tonight.
I have a question. Do you think that the CIA treated women any differently from any of the other, like the FBI, the State Department, or the Justice Department, or I can't think of any others. Those.
Yes.
Do you think?
I think so. And in some ways, I think the CIA was better, but then I also think there were other agencies that were more progressive. So, for example, I think probably there were parts of the CIA that were more progressive than, say, the FBI. Maybe even the NSA, but I don't know that I can say that with authority. NGA, I think, was much more progressive for women than the CIA. So I think it kind of varied, but there was definitely differences among the agencies. But then even within the CIA itself, as you know, because Terry is also former CIA. I'm revealing her. I'm blowing her cover, and she's also
You're
an
outing
author.
her.
Yes, but yes, I mean, because I know Terry's experience with the agency was much more inclusive than a lot of other parts, even early on too. So
It was because I was in tech.
yes, and I almost wonder if that is because there wasn't like a very good understanding or appreciation of how powerful and useful it would be. So like, yeah, we'll train women too. Like, sure, well, you know, not knowing like this is actually really important. So yeah.
So I have a couple questions. Okay. First, what attracted you to join CIA?
I was recruited from my college, Indiana University, Big Ten. What? Okay, we need to sidebar. Okay. I speak Swahili and Zulu. And so I was recruited for my foreign languages. It's not what my plan was. I wanted to join the Peace Corps. I had an interview with the Peace Corps like 2 weeks before, and the guy was a real asshole. And it just said, like, you have no skills. I just don't know what I would do with you. And so I ended up, then I just knew there was some government agency coming to campus and they were interested in foreign languages. Skipped the interview because I wanted to see Ladysmith Black Mambazo, which, like, who wouldn't, right? And so I drove to Chicago with my Zulu class. And then I lied to the recruiter and said I had car problems and couldn't make it to the interview. And and then like an hour outside of Bloomington, my car broke down. And that is why my mom would say, you don't lie. So then the recruiter stayed an extra day. I didn't know he was CIA until I was in the room with him. And just a completely different experience. And he knew, you know, that I loved Africa. And he said, listen, you're going to be advising US policymakers about Africa, about African politics. You'll travel there. You'll use your foreign languages. And it was just a night and day experience. Both offers came in around the same time. I did get a Peace Corps offer, believe it or not. But I didn't even consider it. And I knew it was like the proverbial fork in the road, because once you go to the CIA, you can never do the Peace Corps. If you do the Peace Corps, you can wait 5 years after you finish and then do the CIA. So I knew I was, you know, going away and never looking back.
They were just nicer to you.
They really valued it. They realized that, like, nobody know. I was one of 5 Swahili speakers in the entire intelligence community, like across agencies, which, you know, gave me a lot of really cool opportunities too. No, I learned in India. And then I was a Fulbright scholar in Tanzania. But yeah, Big Ten schools are like a great place to learn foreign languages in general, but African languages specifically.
So my second question is that if you were then, like, you're 8, I don't know how old you were.
Tread carefully.
When you joined.
I was a child bride. I was 21.
So if you were 21 today, would you join the CIA today?
Ooh, do you want the honest answer or like the really good? Is this being recorded? No. Hello. No, I would, because it really has made me who I am. Would I have still left? Yes. I think I went through like an identity crisis. My husband and I both left at the same time 10 years ago. And I definitely went through like, who am I if I don't work there? Especially coming from like Washington, D.C. culture, like, what you do for a living is who you are. I had no hobbies. Like my hobby was like literally working on Africa and like going to Africa. Like that was who I was. And so that was really difficult, but then getting over that hump and then being able to live a more creative life where like we talked about this on your podcast, like I can fly to any country I want without asking for permission first. I can, if I weren't married, sleep with any foreigner I want without asking for permission, no, without filling out paperwork. It's real.
So
It's
the
a true
priorities
thing.
in life.
Yes. Like, and so, but seriously though, I loved writing there, but to be able to use the skill set that I learned there, but then to have the freedom to write creatively is just so rewarding. So yeah, I probably would do it again because it's part of my story.
That's such amazing lore.
Yeah, that's great. It's a great like party trick. I was in the CIA. Yeah.
So along the same lines, how did being in the CIA affect your personal life? Like, did people know you were in the CIA, or was it a big secret? Did you have
I was undercover. So part of my time there, I was not undercover when I was an analyst. And then I went undercover. And so I told like my family that I left and worked for, somewhere else. But you can tell basically who you want to tell, like, and who you trust. And they, people used to not tell their spouses, but at some points, but most of the time people do because it helps your marriage to like, and your spouse can be very useful in clandestine operations. And as the wives were in the 60s and 70s when they were like free unpaid labor. But yeah, like I did tell people, but it does affect your personal life in the sense that all of your friends are at the CIA. Everyone you date is at the CIA. Like you live in sort of this bubble because it's really hard for you to relate to people outside of that world. And especially when you go in at such a young age.
your husband?
Yeah, I swore I would never marry a case officer, but I found a good one. So.
How did you transition? Like you just said, it's hard to relate to people while you're there. How did you transition to the real world?
It was hard. Yeah, it was really difficult. I went through like a phase of like, my husband had this joke where I would be like, I used to write for the president. And then he would say, who did you write for? And like tease me because I just felt so like unimportant. Right. And then just being, and it was around the time that I had become a mom and I'm like, going to like exercise classes, like it was just like a completely different world. And so it took a while to kind of just change the mindset. And some people who are in much, much longer than I was still struggle because they just view the world differently. They've learned to compartment different emotions, particularly if they worked on, counterterrorism and, very, violent, disturbing things, right? Where they've had to learn how to handle all of that and work with unsavory characters. So for me, I mean, there was a period of having to adjust and there were tears and, but luckily my husband and I were going through that at the same time. And then we both ended up at Amazon together too for a period, which was really great. So because we always when we met, we worked together and we actually worked on a case together before we were married and then we weren't allowed to. But we were kind of always used to being together and then we left and then we got to be together a little bit at Amazon and then went our different paths. But that helped, I think, too, knowing someone else so close to me who was going through the same identity crisis as I was.
Codependence.
Yes.
I have another question for you, and this is a very general question. In the book, you talked about recruiting people, and I just wondered if the political environment at home influenced your ability, and I'm talking about now, if it influences the ability of someone to recruit an asset.
You mean the current political climate right now?
Yes.
I think so.
Yes, and whether whoever the president was at the time,
Mhm.
or what the administration.
Yeah, if
was
it
at the time.
influenced, I think so. Assets are motivated to work with us for all sorts of reasons. People often cite money, but I think that's less common than people realize. A lot of times it can be something like, I had an asset, for example, his parents were killed in a plane crash that was shot down by terrorists. And so he was motivated to work with us out of a sense of patriotism and really believing in, that the US was doing, good things, right? So it could be a very positive motivator, or someone from their country might think that working with us, will really help their country's foreign policy. Maybe they're headed in the right direction. And so I think the leadership of our country plays a huge role, because if we're on a path that other countries are not on board with, why would they want to work with us, right? It's going to be a lot more difficult if they lose faith in our global standing and our leadership. So I think that's certainly a concern.
I was just wondering how you deal with how you dealt with the pressure of knowing this is national security that you're
It's
working
great for a
with.
person with anxiety. It's great.
I'm there's no way I could be that confident.
Yeah,
I know. I feel like people would say as a joke, oh, well, it's not the CIA.
And there's also this piece of if there's not a lot of women, I'm sure you're concerned. I have to prove to everyone that me and also all of the women belong.
Yes.
Together.
Well, and when a woman makes a mistake, there are repercussions for all women in a way that does not exist for men.
And the
so
mistake is national security.
Yes, like for example, one of the women I talk about in the book is Jennifer Matthews, who was the chief of base in 2009 in Afghanistan at Coast, which was bombed, and we lost a number of officers. And a lot of the discussion after that was criticizing the fact that she was a woman and she had no business to be there in the first place. And never mind the fact that the men there who were killed, were also dads. One of them had a call sign, which I can't tell you because they redacted it from the book, but it related to him being a dad. Okay. And so after that, there were women who then experienced difficulties because it made people question, and it was, oh, well, don't be the next Jennifer Matthews, which is just so terribly unfair, right? But it's just, there's more visibility because there's so few of us, right? But the work is very weighty. And I will say that when you come in the door, you're given so much responsibility right off the bat. So when I started in 2006, the Ethiopians had just invaded Somalia, and I was writing for the president that week. And so what's great is that they trust you and they are giving you this training, and they've hired you because of your level of expertise. And that is really remarkable to be given that kind of bandwidth, but it's also a lot of responsibility because if you mess up, it's a huge deal. And then particularly working on Africa, you're given even more bandwidth because there are few of us, which I thought was fantastic because, you almost always knew that you knew more than the person you were talking to because policymakers, often knew very little about Africa. And so that helped with confidence. But I had plenty of experiences where I would go into a room, particularly with military customers, where I could tell judgments were made immediately when I walked into the room based on my appearance as a woman, as a young woman in my 20s. But I just relied on my trade craft and briefing and my expertise. And by the end of the meeting, it was a non-issue, right? Because I had proven myself. But certainly that, I also did from a practical standpoint, when I briefed at the National Security Council, sometimes I would do those superhero in the bathroom, right beforehand, because you have this moment of oh my gosh, I'm briefing the president's national security advisor in Africa. What am I doing here? Because we all get imposter syndrome, right? So just a little trip to the bathroom and a little, right beforehand. And then you just tell yourself, I know this, I know more than the person I'm talking to. It's going to be okay. We all have those moments in life though. We're all just faking it until we make it. Great question. Thank you.
I have a question. So you were just saying it was redacted. So as an author, how is the writing process
Yes.
different
So
in a book like this than just your typical novel?
Yeah. So back when I signed, when I was a child bride, they had me sign this lifetime secrecy agreement, which I clearly did not understand the weight of it. And I say this as a mom now of a 22-year-old and a 20-year-old and 19-year-old. So I my kids, I can't imagine them signing something like that. They're also pandemic kids. So but
so they can't write.
So yeah, ChatGPT. No. They're great. But yeah, so basically anything I write has to go through the CIA's publication review board, which you hear horror stories about it. I actually had a great experience, and I think it's because I involved them really early in the book and talked with their public affairs office and said, this is what I'm trying to do. This is meant to be a celebration of progress. I'm not going to shy away from the unfavorable parts. And they said, well, we wouldn't expect you to. Like, that would be highly unrealistic. And so they were great. And they invited me back. And I mean, of course, all the women they gave me access to interview, like, it was all highly censored and like cleared talking points. But even that gives you observations, right? Because you're seeing what they're allowed to say and what they're not allowed to say. And you also get to go to the gift shop, right? Where I got that great mug that we talked about.
Yes.
But anyway, yeah, so I was grateful that they really only had minor redactions in this, like that call sign, another call sign, and then the location of a tour, which was laughable to me because they made me put that like Janine was serving in a Caribbean country, but like it's in the Washington Post, the New York Times, like what country she served in. And so like, we'll just pretend like we don't know, like just like it's a Caribbean country with high crime rate. So anyway, so it's kind of like silly things that they take out, but I was particularly concerned with the latter chapters where I'm talking about ongoing investigations with sexual harassment and sexual assault. And I thought like it would be really dumb of them to like try to censor that, but I didn't know. And luckily they didn't touch it. So that was really, really good and a huge relief. And they were quick. So
have you heard from women who are currently working in intelligence about your writing this book or any other, and what's their feedback generally?
it's been really great. They've been really excited about it. And I think the biggest concern I had for this book was like wanting to do the women proud, like both the women who have left, who like shared their stories, and the women who are there, because it's a lot of responsibility. And we're also used to having a lot of control over our information, our stories. And then for me to not give them access to it until, they got it before it came out officially, but like they didn't have a say in it. Right. And so luckily the feedback was just so overwhelmingly positive. And the women who are there now are so thankful that, we're, giving voice to this, because otherwise it wouldn't be, in particular with some of the current issues. So thankfully it's been really positive. And that is one of the concerns too, because there is an immediate, like if you leave and start writing books, like there is the fear of like the eye roll from your colleagues. Right. And so thankfully, like they approve that I know of. And if they don't, like, don't tell me. No.
Before we start signing books, would you mind talking a little bit about what you're working on now?
Which project? We had this great brainstorming before we came here about all of our wonderful ideas. So I have a novel that I've been working on that's a spy romance. And it was a really great break when this became really heavy to write about, particularly the sexual assault. So that would be kind of my escape. So it's a really fun story that plays around with time about a CIA reports officer who orchestrates a bump in Zanzibar of a CIA asset who she falls for over reading about him in cable traffic. And so really, really fun piece to write or book to write. And then I have a nonfiction idea that I'm toying around with as well that deals with women's body autonomy and those type of issues that we will hopefully join forces on in some aspect. More on that later. So yeah, lots of things. Got some TV projects that hopefully I'll get to share more on soon. But yeah, enjoying the creative life and not being in a classified bubble. Like it's great. So really rewarding. Yeah.
Not being in, your fiction project at least no one could possibly redact anything.
Well, you would be surprised. They still have to read it.
That's true.
But they already did, and they were great. So that's already been through.
That is so wild.